Hello. My mom told me when I was younger that on Sunday you had to wear your finest, so I wanted to just say you can be mindful and fashionable at the same time. Yes. I'm going to be extra fashionable and quote Rumi now. And the reason I'm going to quote Rumi is because what I'm going to talk about in the next 30 minutes really relates to something he wrote 750 years ago as a Sufi poet and philosopher. He wrote the following. He said, "My life can be summed up in 3 phases. I was raw, I became cooked, and then I burned." Well, digital life and the modern life we live today has actually accelerated our cooking process. And there are a growing number of us who actually can maybe feel like a carton of milk with an expiration date stamped on our wrinkled forehead. This woman in the front row loves that. So what a lot of the people who actually are feeling that expiration date on their wrinkled forehead are baby boomers. 2 years ago was the first year that all baby boomers globally, or all baby boomers, let's just focus on the US, were over the age of 50. Interestingly enough, life expectancy has changed an awful lot in the last 100 years. In the year 1900, the average life expectancy in the United States was 47 years old. 100 years later, year 2000, it was 77 years old. By the year 2100, what will it be? Maybe if that trajectory continues, it'll be 107 years old, which means at age 56, I am barely halfway through my life. Makes me feel good. Yes, thank you. So are we a carton of milk or a bottle of fine wine? Are we here with something to offer in the digital age? Or is it time for us to get the hell off the stage and let the digital natives take over because this is a digital era? Well, if it's the latter, then I guess I better leave stage now, but I'm not going to. I'm an optimist, and based upon my last 4 years with Airbnb, I can say quite heartily that I think in the digital era, the elders actually do have an important voice to participate in the world as we know it today. So I want to just start by saying that for me, on a personal level, I think that the way I thought of elders historically and wisdom historically was that it flowed downhill. It flowed from old to young. And I actually think right now we have the opportunity for the first time in history to create an intergenerational transfer of wisdom that changes the physics so that the wisdom doesn't flow just downhill, it flows in both directions. So boomers and millennials and Gen Xers and all of us can learn from each other. So I'll tell you my story around that. So on a personal level, I've spent the last few years feeling a bit of the recipe of being cooked and burned at the same time. I started a company, as Emily mentioned, Joie de Vivre Hospitality, when I was 26 years old, 30 years ago, and grew it for 24 years as the CEO. Grew it and had 3,500 employees at our peak. And then I sold it, and I didn't really know what was going to happen next. How many of you saw the film with Robert De Niro and Anne Hathaway called The Intern a couple years ago? Wow, very popular film. Well, Robert De Niro said the following. He said, "Musicians don't retire, they stop when there's no more music left inside of them." So I know I had some music left inside of me in my early 50s, but I didn't necessarily know where to share it. And that's about the time when the Airbnb founders came knocking on my door. Now, Brian Chesky is the co-founder and CEO of Airbnb. He reached out to me and he said, "We have a problem. We have a good problem. The good problem is we're a small company, small tech startup, and we're growing really fast. But we know that our stool, when we grow up, the stool that we are sitting on has 3 legs to it, and we only have 2 figured out: technology and design. And we don't know a thing about hospitality. And there's nobody in this company who actually has a hospitality background, no senior leader. Frankly, nobody in the company had a hospitality or travel industry background." So he said, "That's why we're coming to you. Will you help us democratize hospitality?" So I said, wow, democratizing hospitality, that sounds exciting. But what's Airbnb? I didn't know. I had heard of Airbnb. I thought it was a subsidiary of Couchsurfing. And then he said, let me come over to your house and I will tell you more. I'll Uber over. And I said, you'll what? 4 years ago, I did not have an Uber or Lyft app on my phone. Now I just have a Lyft app on my phone. But I will tell you that I, at that moment, was so excited and so intimidated. I was 52 years old, and I'd never worked in a tech company, where the maxim that defines your worth goes back to Descartes. I code, therefore I am. Well, I don't write or read code, let's be clear. And I was also going to be twice the age of the average employee in the company at 52. I was also going to be reporting to Brian. Now, Brian's smart as can be, growth mindset. I was very impressed by him. I wouldn't have joined the company if I didn't think so. But Brian was 21 years younger than me. He wanted me to be his mentor, but I was also going to report to him. I had run my own company for 24 years and was a CEO. What was it going to feel like getting a performance review the first time from someone the age of my theoretical son? Well, I decided to jump wholeheartedly in. My first week on the job, I'm sitting in a meeting, and it's in a conference room, and an engineer looks at me, the new guy in the room, and asks me a question, really dangerous. He says to me, if you ship a feature and no one uses it, did it really ship? So now, I took philosophy in college, and I understood sort of the bearings of the question, the overall, but I did not take computer science, and I had no idea what it meant to ship a feature or ship a product. Chip was in deep ship, because I had no clue what he was talking about. So I just sort of said, I don't know. So by the end of the week, I sat down with a friend of mine, and I was a week into this new job. It was supposed to be 15 hours a week, and by that point, it was really clear, this is 15 hours a day. This is very immersive. And I said to my friend, you know what? Brian and the founders, the three millennial co-founders, they asked me to be their mentor. But I gotta tell you, I feel more like an intern. And this is the next sentence I said to my friend is the purpose of my talk today. Can I simultaneously be a mentor and an intern at the same time? So I decided to stay. I decided to show up. And I'm glad I did. 4 years later, pretty good success story. We've done pretty well. Not without controversy, especially in San Francisco. But the reality is I've learned a lot, and I've been able to be surrounded by people who's taught me a lot. And what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk to you about the 4 key lessons I've learned about sharing wisdom with someone younger than me and receiving wisdom back from them. All right. First lesson can best be described as the following. You have to, in order to actually remake yourself, in my case after 50, you have to strategically forget part of your historical work identity. That is not easy. It's like taking off a costume. So Airbnb did not need a second CEO, nor did it need me standing at the pulpit spouting baby boomer wisdom, brick and mortar hotelier wisdom to a bunch of people who wanted to understand hospitality, but in a new way. So I realized quickly I needed to listen. I needed to listen with empathy and no ego and very little judgment. I needed to think of myself as a cultural anthropologist, Margaret Mead in the tech world, and not necessarily dressed like this though. But I mean, she dressed differently than I did. But she was in some ways my role model, because I needed to just have a point of view that I'm here to learn about a habitat that I'm not familiar with, tech I'm not familiar with. Well, This wasn't easy. I was a guy for 24 years who was like, in a very minor way, the Richard Branson of my company. I was the face. I was the person on center stage. I was Mama and Papa Bear in the company. And now, at Airbnb, I was the guy in the sidelines, the acting coach, actually helping these guys know what to say when they came out here. They were smarter than me in all kinds of ways, but they were good. It was great to work with them, but I had to get over the idea that I was an admiration addict. I didn't have to have all of the attention, and I could be behind the scenes and support them. So if I could summarize that first lesson about learning to change your historical work identity, I'll say it as follows. When you're invited to jump on a rocket ship, don't ask which seat you're in. Get a little bit clear about where you are sitting, but sit in a seat, strap on your seatbelt, start to adjust your identity and contribute in whatever way you know possible. That's my first lesson. My second lesson could be summed up in an implicit trade agreement. Now, trade agreements aren't all that popular these days, but this implicit trade agreement, I never said this to any employee in Airbnb, but implicitly there was an understanding. What I would say to them, without saying it to them, but they figured it out, this is what I was looking for, is could you trade me some digital intelligence if I trade you some emotional intelligence? So all of us are addicted, I don't have one in my pocket right now, to our smartphones. And I got to tell you, hanging out with a bunch of people who are half my age, who are digital natives and have grown up with screens in their face, they understand that smartphone a lot better, in my case, an iPhone, a lot better than I do. They understand the face and the inner workings of that gadget better than they do, in many cases, the person sitting next to them. The face of the iPhone, the face of the person sitting next to them, inner workings of the iPhone, inner workings of the person sitting next to them. Generally speaking, not all young people are this way, but a lot of them are. I'm not saying that young people don't understand emotions, and we all have digital emojis today, so emotions are expressed in new ways. And the term emo, being an emo, didn't exist back in the schoolyard when I was growing up. But emojis don't replace interpersonal face-to-face fluency. And what a lot of these young people didn't realize is that what could help them be an amazing leader over the course of their lifetime was understanding being emo savvy, not just digital savvy. I have a quote. There's twice I'm going to pull something from my pocket. There's a woman named Nancy Giordano who is a futurist, and she said the following to me, which I think absolutely defines what is important to know about young people in leadership today. She said, with little training, we expect young digital leaders to miraculously embody relationship wisdoms we elders had twice as long to learn. So I was fortunate because Brian Chesky, along with 25 other things he asked me to do, he said, I want you to set up a learning and development program so that our 28-year-old managers can learn how to manage and lead the 24-year-old people who are their direct reports. And so that's part of what I did. And that meant creating programs like designing alliances. How do you design an alliance with somebody who's opposed to you on something? Or how do you walk into a room to lead a meeting and take the temperature emotionally in the room before you start that meeting? Now, we also created classes that were good for me, which were like digital intelligence classes, how to learn how to code, how to understand your iPhone. But I will tell you, that's one I could use over and over again. In that film, The Intern, a couple years ago, Anne Hathaway is the young CEO in the film. And she does not want Robert De Niro to be her senior intern. Why? Because she says he's a little too observant. Well, being too observant is what helped me succeed at Airbnb. It actually helped me to create an emotional bank account with those I was working with. And more than anything, it helped me to see that business Whether you're in B2B business or B2C or C to C or A to Z, it's all really H to H, human to human. And that's no surprise then that emotional intelligence, or EQ, is all the more important. And it's more important the higher you are in leadership, because you are the emotional thermostat of those you're leading. So I'll sum up this second lesson about the trade of, they give me some digital intelligence if I give you some emotional intelligence, in quoting Dan Goleman. Dan Goleman wrote the book Emotional Intelligence 20 years ago, and he was able to show that 2/3 of the success of leaders had to do with their EQ, and only 1/3 of it had to do with their IQ or their level of experience in the work that they were doing. All right, so that's the second one. My third lesson is the following: learning never ends. William Yeats wrote long ago, education is not filling a pail, it's lighting a fire. So I was able to stoke a fire at Airbnb partly because I was catalytically curious. And I was catalytically curious partly because I was clueless, because I didn't understand the world I was in, this tech world I was in. And because I could take off the costume of being the expert, it allowed me to have a beginner's mind. And when you have a beginner's mind, you have the ability to ask questions like a 4-year-old. A lot of why and what if questions, as opposed to the what and the how of business, which is what senior business leaders primarily focus on. Now, asking a lot of why and what if questions allowed me in my role to discover some blind spots in the company that a lot of us hadn't looked at. Because when you're so focused on the what and how, you don't see the why and what if. So that helped an awful lot. It helped me to also understand that if I'm going to be both a mentor and an intern at the same time, I better intern publicly and mentor privately. So what I mean by that is nobody wants to be criticized or given feedback in a meeting with everybody by me, the age of their father. I could do that afterwards. But in the meeting, I could ask all kinds of questions that made me look like an idiot. Because everybody knew Chip asks beginners questions, but he also sometimes discovers some things that we hadn't thought about. So that helped an awful lot. There's a guy named Peter Drucker. Many of you have probably heard of Peter Drucker, probably the most famous management theorist of all time. 20 years ago, he said the following: the leaders of the past knew how to tell, the leaders of the future know how to ask. In a constantly changing world, questions may be more important than answers. So traditional elders had all the wise answers. Modern elders have the catalytic questions. And incidentally, just to sort of sum up this idea of curiosity and constant learning, Drucker lived to age 95. He took that sense of curiosity in life and he funneled it into every year or two, he would take a new subject that had nothing to do with his work that was fascinating to him, and he'd become one of the world's leading experts on it. It could be Japanese flower arranging or medieval war strategies. So the thing I want to do to sum up this third point is I want to give you an invitation to ask yourself, how can you be more curious? How can you be catalytically curious about a subject that has nothing to do with your work? I have lived this habit for about 10 years now, and it's led me to become one of the world's leading experts on festivals. And why are festivals making such a comeback in the 21st century? And it's because the more digital we get, the more ritual we need. It's also led me to actually being fascinated by our emotions. Why is it that we have certain emotions, and what's the alchemy of emotions you might have inside of you all at the same time, which led me to writing my book, Emotional Equations. More recently, it's led me to actually learning about waves in the ocean, why they exist, why they are certain shapes, partly because at age 56, I am a novice surfer. So that's my newest curiosity, is learning how to surf in my mid-50s. So being curious is an elixir for life. My last point was perfectly quoted in the New York Times this morning. If you didn't see it, it was fascinating. I'm going to pull this out again. It's not all about know how. It's also about know who. There was an article in the New York Times this morning about the importance of libraries, but the fact that libraries are there are fewer of them than there used to be. And there's a quote from a novelist who said, Google can bring you 100,000 answers, but a librarian can bring you just the right one. Well, Google is amazing, an amazing company, and over time they make, with artificial intelligence, they get better and better at understanding nuance of what I'm looking for. But I actually became the librarian at Airbnb. Wasn't going to say that before I saw that article this morning. I said I was the Ask Me guy. Well, I guess I was the librarian. Because what people knew about Chip is curious. He's pretty well read. He's pretty well connected. He's interested in a lot of subjects. And he's sort of a wise, advisor. So what happened in my time at Airbnb, I oversaw like 8 different teams. But what happened, there were like 25 teams in the company. What ended up happening is I started getting people from all over the company asking if they can take 30 minutes with me or 15 minutes with me to talk about something. Now, generally, you don't do that. It takes time. But I said yes. I said an enthusiastic yes to everybody who wanted to talk to me privately about something, partly because I didn't realize it at the time, but there was going to be a collateral benefit that came from that. And the collateral benefit is if you took all of those relationships and all of those connections I had in the company and plotted them on a whiteboard, you would see with all of the different teams that I was connected to all of the islands of the company. And weirdly, what that meant was overnight, I became incredibly knowledgeable about the pulse of the company and what was happening, which for the founders, the company's growing so fast, they had a harder and harder time knowing what was happening as we're growing and doubling every year in terms of headcount. So that was what came out of that. Now, recently, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we announced that I am, after 4 years of being in a 60, 70-hour-a-week role, helping to lead the company and steer the rocket ship, I have now moved to just a strategic advisor role, which means that I get to surf in Baja a lot more. Yes, thank you. And it also means that I have more time to just read. And I look a little bit tan because I just got back from Baja a couple days ago. And I was reading a book down there called A Handbook of Wisdom. And it's a bunch of academics who are all asking the question, how do you define wisdom? And what was interesting is they weren't wise enough to come to a common answer. But one of them said, you know it when you see it. Wisdom is you know it when you see it. Ironically, in 1964, Judge Potter Stewart in the Supreme Court said, that's how you define obscenity and pornography as well. You know it when you see it. It is also the exact same words that one of the co-founders of Airbnb said to me when he said, you can't leave, you have to be a strategic advisor. We can't have you leave altogether because you have an intangible benefit here. It's hard to know exactly what you've done in your 4 years here, but you know it when you see it. And, they didn't want to get rid of me, even though I was, the old guy. So if I were to summarize all of this, I'd say the following. It's been a humbling and exhilarating journey, no doubt about it at all. And I think more than anything, I have learned that when you create space in your life, interesting things can emerge. And I'm creating space in my life again, so who knows what's next. What I also think is that there are boomers and millennials and Gen Xers and everybody. We all have something to learn from each other. There's no doubt about that. What's interesting is that there are a growing number of people who are my age and older who feel a little irrelevant, and they don't feel like they have something to offer. And there's a growing number of people who are quite young who are growing more and more powerful, because in the digital age, if you're a digital native and you understand tech really well, it serves you well. What I think we can look at, and this is a personal growth question as well as a socioeconomic one, is how do we create this bridge between the generations? And I like to call this, in terms of my role, as being a modern elder who serves and learns, is mentor and intern, is student and sage, all at the same time. Now, that's a lot to be doing all of that at once. I think it's necessary for boomers. Why? Because we're going to live 10 years longer than our parents. And power in a digital society, as defined by the average age of a tech CEO, is 10 years younger than a generation ago. Do the math. We're going to live 10 years longer. Power is moving 10 years younger. We have 20 years of additional obsolescence and irrelevancy. That can lead to some serious boomer angst. So what do we do about it? Well, we create a means for people to share. We create a means for people to learn from each other. We create a means for the generations to realize that there is so much we can offer each other. There's a great and wonderful African proverb that I heard a few years ago, and is so relevant to this. It goes as follows. When an elder dies, it's like a library has burned down. Unfortunately today, libraries and elders aren't so popular in the digital era. But wisdom will never grow old. And wisdom is often about pattern recognition. And the longer you've been on this planet, the more patterns you've seen, especially up here with me and my fashion. Elders have always been there for the young, to help them with their growth. But maybe for the first time in history, there is a symbiotic sharing of wisdom that is meant to go across generations in such a way that society is served for the better. And maybe for those of us who are modern elders, it's time to rethink Rumi's 3 phases. Maybe there's a 4th. I was raw, I became cooked, I burned, and then I was raw again. Thank you.